Hello and welcome to this episode of Navigate Now. This is the podcast where we understand and discuss everything around people and places. We've got our guest today on this particular episode. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And thanks, Shaun, for joining us. It'd be great to hear a little bit about you and what you do as your organisation.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm the founder and CEO of Jacob Bailey Group. We are a group of creative business services agencies, and that includes Jacob Bailey, which focuses very much around brand and website development. That also includes 032, that focuses on food and beverages and fast moving consumer goods. We also have Inftex, which concentrates on web build in WordPress. And I guess the reason I'm here and talking to Jonathan today is we also have a business called Destination Core, which is dedicated to providing software solutions for destination organizations in order to improve the performance of those destinations.
Yeah, super looking forward to this kind of conversation where we can unpick, obviously on this podcast, we talk all about people and places and how people navigate around those particular environments. And that's one really good thing about having guests on this podcast, because there's so many different facets that make a successful destination, a successful journey, and a successful place. So maybe just to kick off the conversation then, what kind of things interest you when we're thinking about navigation and journeying around maybe a new place that you've been to or a place you frequent all the time?
I think navigation is really interesting, and it is developing. We know, we'll come on to this probably a bit later on around the future of navigation, which is very much digital. But each journey is different, isn't it? I mean, sometimes it's about the journey, so it's about all the little stop-offs. It's about the enjoyment of each leg of that particular journey, and not so much about the overall destination. Other times it's about the destination. You just want to get there as quickly as you possibly can. I mean, you think about the sat navs in our cars, for example, where you do have a choice of the scenic route, you get the choice of the quickest route, etc. And each one of those gives you a slightly different experience.
100%. And we were chatting in the office earlier around the other day around kind of using sat nav, and there's issues with it. It gets you to where you want to go to, but maybe I'm just talking for myself. I don't remember the journey that I took to get there.
Yeah.
So that's really picking up on your point there around kind of sometimes it's very destinational. I want to get, and sometimes it's an experience.
Yeah,
it's part of that excitement.
And in our world, we deal with a lot of we produce websites as one of the main platforms for destination organizations. And similarly, the journey online has to take into account the UX and the UI. So the UX, for example, is your overall experience, the usability, the accessibility, and actually the joy of interacting. But it focuses on the user journey. Does it meet their need? And that's where it comes onto the on location. Do you necessarily get joy in following wayfinding? Maybe not, but you should at least be able to focus on the journey, and it should be able to meet the needs that it sets out to get you to certain areas of the place that you're looking to get to. So that then breeds a certain amount of satisfaction about that particular place, and that in turn promotes a positive or a negative experience. In the same way as UI, it deals with creating attractive, visually appealing, sort of functional interfaces. The different layouts, the icons, the imagery, the typography. Again, I think the aesthetics. With the on location, those things are still important. They're not quite so dynamic, but they are still important. I've been to many places where you literally have to be standing about a foot away to be able to read the signage.
Yes.
And actually you may have missed the signage in the first place. So you've already walked past it, and you're already going into a direction that you didn't really wish to go. And we also have to remember that not everybody uses digital. So the stock answer is, well, just Google Map it. Just put it in Google. But not everybody does that. You'd be surprised to think that I think maybe 16% of the UK's population, that's about 9 million people, are not digitally savvy, not even savvy, they're just not comfortable with digital. They don't use it.
Or even like
That goes up to some reports saying even 21%. So you've got millions of the population that don't feel comfortable using something as basic as Google Maps. So that's a large chunk. It's 20% of our audience that needs that good old-fashioned traditional wayfinding. And it needs to be aesthetically pleasing, but it also needs to be very functional, and it needs to stand out to serve the purpose. Otherwise, it's not focusing on the journey, and it's not meeting any need whatsoever.
I often say when we're having conversations around what is wayfinding, and more so than that, what's that experience look like? It's about two things. It's about many things. It's about two things: the destination and the discovery. I can want to get to an appointment in a hospital, to a place in the town centre, to my seat in the stadium, but it's about what I can then discover on that route as well. Going back to what we were speaking about around the experience,
Yeah.
I think is important. But just segueing on from there, you mentioned kind of the work you do, obviously with Destination Core, etc. And I wanted to ask the question: how data can improve people's experiences of places? Because we can look at it from historical information point of view, we can look at it from our own personal perspective of a place, and everyone's perspective will be different depending on if they are young, old, if they are a new person visiting the area, if they're a tourist, if they're a business owner, operator, etc., etc. But often it's good to look at the granular detail of the evidence behind how we can improve things and what things are working and not working. So what's your experience then of using kind of data in that conversation?
Well, we have 3 platforms within Destination Core. Destination Core 1, Destination Core Pro, Destination Core Enterprise, and quite naturally they become more complex and more feature and function led as you go on. But all of them are driven by Destination Core Insights, and that is collecting evidence-based, real-time data that allows those that are managing those places to improve their performance. So we are absolutely locked into the importance of data, because data leads to insight. Insight leads to information that can impact positively or negatively decisions that you then make. You're not just making decisions based on hearsay or gut feel. You've got some evidence-based information to make those judgments. And it's the same with wayfinding. Same with us on the when we do our websites, and the same on location. There is no reason not to have access to good insight in order to inform your decision making anymore. And in a nutshell, it just improves the decision making. It means you can make better decisions, and it's based on evidence. That outcome has got to be favourable, as opposed to just going with a particular gut feel, or placing a signage in one place against another, using certain fonts, using certain signs. Is it digital? Is it traditional? All these things, there is evidence that you can surface in order to make better decisions around those.
So, like, obviously, data is a vast plethora of opportunity in that sense. And one thing I'm often keener in this podcast to make sure that we can take away a couple of things, a couple of nuggets that we can just raise the dial of in our awareness as custodians of places. So then, with that in mind, if there was, say, 3 pieces of data that you would recommend that people focus on, and I'm not saying there has to be 3, 1, 5, but a couple of pieces of data that would be your first go-to things to find out about, would anything spring to mind when thinking about that?
Well, the first one is always going right back to the basics of marketing is know your audience. And in a place, it's rarely just one audience. You've got a number of different personas in a place that make up the overall community. So when in marketing and you've got, say, a potential product, you try and focus on those primary audiences, and then you've got a secondary and tertiary. So when you're in a place, you have to accommodate all of these different communities, all these different demographics. So it makes it far more complex, which is one of the reasons I love place marketing. is because it's so complex. It's not straightforward. You have to bend some of the rules, enhance some of the rules, add in some really creative thinking about how we go about this. And a lot of it is around providing the best solution that hits a much wider and broader audience, which potentially can be counter to some of the marketing 101 that you might have received early in your career, and particularly in certain other sectors. So know your audience. I mean, who are we talking to? What is the population, for example? I already said that 16% up to 20% feel uncomfortable with even the basic or lack the basic skills of digital. So therefore, 20% of your population is likely to need that good old-fashioned wayfinding. Yeah, so that has to be considered. You can't just throw out 20% and think, well, we're just going to ignore those. Then there can be some educational pieces come in. So you've got your audience, you understand your audience, you understand your personas about who you're talking to. You then start to put those solutions together to actually meet the needs of those particular audiences. So again, what are their needs around navigation? What are the challenges? What's keeping them up at night? What are they getting frustrated about in terms of wayfinding? So who are your audience and what are their main issues, basically?
Yeah, we often have that conversation around accessibility.
Yeah.
So how many people do you have with wheelchairs, visual impairment, physical impairment, dementia? Obviously, dementia is throughout the whole community, as other impairments would be, naturally. But it's around kind of specifically that dials up a little bit higher in hospitals, because that venue, that place, is a medical location. So you're going to get more people with those kind of situations coming into those environments. So it's important that the messaging, the physical environment, signage in part, but not in totality, is fit for that audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely no audience. There's about, I think, about 15%, latest stat I read, but 15% of the UK population live with some form of disability. Again, that's a massive number. That's an absolutely massive number. And this is where I think the digital wayfinding can come into it, because you can then get into personalization, user preferences. User preferences is well known in website building, UI and UX. It's absolutely about personalizing it for your particular needs, and you start to filter. So, for example, you could easily filter by saying, I've got a certain I want accessibility. So all those businesses within a place, all the areas that are accessible to wheelchairs, for example, it highlights those, it surfaces that information, and then it puts to the background all the rest. So you need to consider your online on location wayfinding in exactly the same way. You have 15% of your audience that has some form of disability. So know your audience. What are those disabilities? What percentages are they? The likelihood that they're going to want to use this particular venue or this particular public service, if it's a hospital, as you used as an example, and whether it's just getting around a town or a city, etc. All of these things need to be considered. And I think that's where digital becomes more flexible. You've got more ability for user preferences. You've got more ability to cater for certain disabilities. You can start to personalize things so it does services all those that can have wheelchair access, could be dog friendly, whatever the particular preference might be. And you start to actually focus in on the choices that you've got, rather than having a plethora of different choices that you might end up struggling to get to, and then not actually being able to enter that particular destination once you get there. So I think that's one of the key and fundamental strengths of digital wayfinding, in the ability to cater for a wider audience.
You mentioned kind of UI and the opportunity that digital in the built environment and also on devices that we have in our pocket, in that sense, help. Because specifically to turn that around to accessibility, and big thing in dementia is color contrast as one aspect of the design language. And then within that digital space, you can customize it to that particular user's needs for their particular situation that they're in. So that's a really helpful.
And equally, if you then, one of the main aims for Destination Core is to convert online users into on-location users, into physical visitors, so to speak. But if the brand experience isn't met on locations, then it's going to have a detrimental impact on all future activities, both online and offline. And I think it's fair to say that you might enjoy a nice coffee, you might go out for a nice meal, but if it's been a bit of a hassle finding these places and you got lost several times on the way, then it's going to impact your overall user experience, in the sense, your overall experience and engagement of that particular place. And every place competes with another place, which I think is sometimes lost on local authorities. You are in competition. There's a lot of collaboration in local authorities, and that's the culture, which is great. And there's a huge amount of benefit in collaboration. But equally, there's another part where you are also competing in place. And every business and that's within that place is competing with all those businesses in another place. So there's that sense of competition as well. So something as simple as wayfinding and going in the wrong direction on several occasions will impact your overall brand experience.
Yeah, like you say, kind of, and that's a helpful segue, I think, into kind of something else I wanted to start to think about. So the question comes to me then, that what is that digital footprint of a place? Obviously, a place has various touch points, as you might say, before you arrive there. So I guess website, like you mentioned, app in some situations. I'm not sure how many towns have apps at the moment in that sense. But what's your understanding and perspective when you speak to custodians of places, i.e. say local authorities, obviously improvement districts, or other individuals of different destinations, around the role of that digital footprint, that digital touch points, before you come into the physical environment?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge, because you're in one place, and if it's been designed properly, and obviously we do with our platforms. If the UX is as good as it can be, the UI is absolutely top drawer, then they've had a very good brand experience already of a place that may not have already visited. They've seen what the top 10 most visited attractions might be, the top 10 restaurants. They can personalize for perhaps dog friendly, or maybe the environment sustainability is something they're really passionate about. So which ones of those places they might visit within that place meet that criteria as well. So they can start to personalize their visit before they've even been there. They can book their location, their accommodation, sorry. They can book their restaurant. They can start to put some itinerary building together, so they know if they're there for 3 days, what can they do over those 3 days, and it starts to map that all out for them. It can give them areas to park. It can give them all this information, other people's reviews, the blogs, the content, vouchers, discounts, you name it, all in this place. It's huge. So you're creating this massive brand experience already, because that's where most people will look before they visit the place. And if they're repeat visitors, they want to see, well, is there anything new? I went to that restaurant. Could there be a discount on the restaurant because we absolutely loved it there? And we know these hotels are dog friendly, so we're going to choose one of those again. But we might stay in a different one because I had a great time in this one. We wanted to change the experience up a little bit, etc., etc. So it's a huge first engagement and vitally important, because again, they're comparing brand with brand, place with place. So let's imagine now they're looking at another place, and that online experience isn't quite as good. That online experience doesn't quite hit the notes, UX and UI. They can't quite surface the information they wish. They can't personalize that as much. They can't put an itinerary builder together, etc., etc. They've not actually been there, but already they're having two totally different experiences, and it will reflect on the actual on location. So we've got them interested in the location. They've got a lot of information. They've got a lot of things planned out, but they go on location. It's absolutely critical that everything that's been communicated on the website is absolutely substantiated while on location, including wayfinding, including navigation, making sure that those establishments that we said were accessible online are actually accessible on location. That brand experience needs to be met and preferably enhanced once you get to one location, but it can just as easily have a negative impact. You might find that, I don't know where this is. That business is closed. That wasn't updated. It's not accessible after all, or this hotel isn't quite as dog friendly. We still, etc., etc. So substantiation is absolutely key. The two must actually work hand in glove. And the idea is to convert online visitors into on-location physical visitors. So hugely important.
Yeah, definitely. I think the core running through that for me is the information provision. Obviously, there's the brand, there's the positioning of you say kind of towns and destinations have different offers, and in one sense might compete with others that have similar offers. Going back to our previous conversation around understanding who your audience is, a town might cater for a certain demographic more than another, and another destination vice versa. In those ways. But I think the information provision that is there from accessibility or whatever, the need of the user is really important. And when we're talking about wayfinding, I always say what's the most important thing in a wayfinding strategy, project, solution is the map. Because the map can give me so many different things. It tells me where I am. It tells me where I want to get to, and it tells me how to get there. Going back to destination discovery, it shows me what's the context around, but also I can have that before I arrive, and I can use that during my visit as well. So it's that connected information pool to be able to be that custodian, be that guide that's ever with me in that sense throughout that experience, whether that's a destination or a discovery journey in that particular place. You mentioned kind of those people that have a vested interest, say they're a resident of a town. You mentioned kind of looking at maybe food as one way and offers as another, of ensuring even those who say, I know this, I've lived here for 10, 15, 20 plus years. Why do I need to go onto the website for my local town? Where do you see that particular, we mentioned avatars, audiences, demographics, etc. Where do you see the digital footprint being really relevant to that audience?
I think, again, information. So information communication. So, for example, events, they would need to know what event was happening, where it was happening. Is it child friendly? Is it part of the nighttime economy? Is it during the day? What's the general feel? Is it ticketed? Is there discounts? What's going to be on? And we're not necessarily always talking about legacy events. If you're a town of a certain size or a city, you will have a series of legacy events throughout the year that most people start to log down in their calendar and know it's coming up at a certain time of year. But in a sense, most of us know roughly when. We're not absolutely 100% on. It's definitely going to be that weekend of that particular month. So we know roughly these legacy events are happening at certain times of year, but we still need to know the absolute details. So the information's there. And then you've got the more frequent events, the more ad hoc events. If you're not communicating the information, then your residents are losing out. And the last thing is nothing worse, actually, than hearing that there was an event that went on in your town, your place, your region, that you would have liked to have gone to, but you didn't hear about it until after the event.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot. So you finally see on all the images of the event, and we were doing this and we were doing that, and fantastic, and there's lots of pats on the back. There's a huge audience didn't even know it was on. So in terms of residents, hugely important around the information. Again, you mentioned equally for residents are the offers, the discounts, opening times, special events, even within retail and restaurants and the nighttime economy, etc. Leisure for, let's just say, school holidays. What's going on at the sports centres, what's going on at the cinema, the theatres, all of those kind of things. Basically, what's going on in my town. So it's hugely important from that point of view. And of course, we mentioned earlier that once you can start to put your user preferences in, when you revisit, getting straight into the stuff you've already indicated that you love, and you won't be surfaced to things you've indicated you don't like. You can always change those preferences at any time. So I think it's just as important for people who work and live and learn in those areas. It's not all about the visitor economy.
Definitely. Yeah, we see that a lot in projects around. Yes, you get some tourist areas, which is important. They've got quite a high churn, so that user experience, they need a lot of information, whereas that resident doesn't need as much, but they need different. And it goes back to the start of our conversation of understanding your audience. And
Absolutely.
you have that information pool that's filtered
Yeah,
effectively.
and if you feel the governance side of things, even local authority governance, it's about your residents. They're not asking, you're not voting for an area you don't live in.
Correct.
So the pure structure and governance of the area you live in is dictated by residents. So absolutely hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure about other territories, specifically in the UK where we're based. You vote as a resident. You don't vote as a business owner, technically. You vote as an individual living in a locality, in a county, a town, a district, etc., etc. So maybe just one other question before we kind of move on to something else. Maybe like, why then do you see navigation as important in our world? What would be the kind of those things that you think, well, we need to improve this, fix that, or what are we really can we celebrate around kind of navigation when you've been moving around towns and clients that you work with?
I think navigation, if we're talking about moving towards what the future of navigation, I think we've touched on a couple of conversations earlier around digital being the way. I think there's 20% of the UK, 16-20% that do not have the basic digital skills. So you still need that old-fashioned wayfinding. And actually, it can add to the aesthetics of a place as well, which is hugely important for any place. The look and the feel of a place is very important. And some of the wayfinding that you can see is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it really adds to the feel and the vibrancy or the heritage or the culture, that overall positioning of a place. Wayfinding can really play a part in that. But I think in terms of things that we can celebrate going forward in terms of wayfinding, I think by and large the other 80% who are comfortable digitally, then I do think it's the digital wayfinding, because that can be connected to your website. Websites are mobile first, so in terms of responsiveness, you've pretty much got the assets already there. The touchscreens makes it easier to understand. Again, self-selection. If the UI and the UX is done properly, it can be easily understood by a much wider audience. Even those who are not feeling very clever about digital, I think you can make it in such a way that it can be dealt with. I think you've got augmented reality, some fantastic stuff going on there, where you've got an overlaying of the digital information above a real world. So that makes it easier to find and to navigate yourself around. Real-time directions. So if there's anything that's changed, perhaps it's more of a transport led issue from navigation, or a road blockage, or whatever that might be. You've got up-to-date real-time information, so you can adjust perhaps your itinerary, or what you were planning to do in that respect. And you've also got other things such as virtual signs, guiding users on their smartphones, etc. We spoke about user preferences. Again, disability specific needs, tailoring to the best route and the destination if there's an accessibility issue. AI, voice assistance, I think that's a biggie. We haven't touched on that yet, but not to be overlooked. Voice assistance, I mean, talk about breaking down barriers. Then if you're not feeling comfortable overall with digital, but if you've got a couple of easy clicks away and you can actually ask using your voice and you get a response back in terms of navigation and location, I think that's
also so important from an accessibility point of view. Someone who's visually impaired sitting at a bus station.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If it came over and said the 93 is 2 minutes away and it's going to go to X destination, that just makes that whole, or even just someone with anxiety.
Yeah,
Really important,
absolutely.
clear understanding of, but also multi-sensory kind of. So you might want some visual and some audio, just to confirm that you are seeing the right thing, hearing the right information. And then from how we take information in as individuals, different for every different type of person. And you can read a lot quicker than you can hear.
Yeah.
So it's understanding the need of the user and the type of information and how best to get that across.
Yeah, how that information is surfaced. I think that's where digital comes into, because traditional, it is pretty, one dimension in that respect. You've got your signage there for a long time, but it needs to tick a few of those core boxes, which for some reason it doesn't always do. But it needs to. But with digital, you've got that much more flexibility, be far more inclusive. I think a key note there, though, is that 5G throughout these places is essential and should be free, because a lot of this digital advancement will rely on 5G. And if you've got 5G, then most places have got the assets already in their website form. So it's just really adapting how it's then surfaced. And you don't have this issue around, for example, where apps, 90% of apps, daily users with apps have disappeared within the first month, 73 days. 62% of users won't use an app after the download after 30 days. An app is great, but once you've decided not to use it, and the trend seems to be that it filters off, you rarely go back to it. And 25% are only used once after they've been downloaded. So if you've got 5G, you've got a really good connection, then I think you've already got the assets. Most places, so you don't then need to have to do that. And maybe some of that funding goes into how you surface that information, that use of augmented reality, that use of AI, and catering for that broadness of audience, as we mentioned at the very early on in the conversation. When you're dealing with place, you've got a very expansive audience, and you're tempted to be inclusive as much as you possibly can for all of them to cater for their needs.
There's loads of exciting things there, aren't there? Loads of opportunities that are available to us. And maybe just a couple of questions then to kind of conclude what we've been thinking about. 2 questions. What most excites you about the future of navigation in place? But then maybe to finish up on, what is that one thing that take away? There's the exciting bit of it, but what's that one takeaway that can be really relevant to me as a custodian of a place listening to this podcast, that can make an impact on the way that we operate as custodians of places and the people that use our places? But first of all, let's talk about excitement.
What excites me, I think there's been a huge struggle over the last decade plus. We've known that the retail offering has suffered a lot in many places. Most will be focused on the place that they live, but actually this is happening all over the UK and all over the world. There is a trend to be buying online, and as such, a lot of the businesses have not been able to compete in terms of on location. What's exciting, I think, that I think we're potentially around the tipping point now. I think we're almost to the point where we're going to be very soon start to turn the corner. I think there will be, and there needs to be, but I think the opportunity for the independents to come through, because it makes more sense for the independents. They can have a business model that suits an independent, and that improves the variation of a place in terms of its retail offering, because you can get things that you can't get anywhere else. There was a point where I think it would be fair to say that you could have visited almost any town in the UK and felt you were in the same town in the UK. It had the same shops, lined up in the same high street. Well, I think that, to an extent, is going to change, and I think that's something to be celebrated. We are a nation of SMEs, of small businesses, and I think that's encouraging, and I think the local authorities are doing their best to help encourage this. And I think we're turning a corner. I think it'll start over the next 2 to 3 years, start to turn that corner. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the knowledge now and the insight that allows custodians of place to realize that it has to be a mix of leisure, it has to be a mix of business, it has to be a mix of retail, it has to be a mix of living accommodation, all within this area. It's not just the way it used to be. We need to bring experiences into places in order to bring it to life. But there's so much information now, so many great case studies of places that have now done this. That insight, talked about insight earlier, that insight is there. There's no excuse not to take the best of all these other strategies and start to mold a good strategy yourself. So that excites me. That knowledge is there. And also the frameworks such as BIDS and LVEPs, etc., that are there to help to achieve this. So I think that excites me.
Brilliant. That's going to be looking forward to see how that adapts and molds.
Yeah.
And
I think we have to
locations.
Yeah. A takeout. I think something, one of your earlier questions that we discussed, I think it's the insight and the marrying up of online to on location, the importance of how the two work so closely together and how one can support the other and how one needs to integrate with the other. And only via data and insight can you truly understand your audiences and what they're doing and where they're going and how they're interacting online and how they're engaging offline. You start to marry that up and bring in other golden threads of data, you really start getting a holistic view of your different personas. And when you've got that, your decision making becomes better and you can improve the performance of your place, your destination.
Definitely. Another conversation we're going to have in this podcast is around GIS. So that's obviously another aspect of using data to inform decisions around how you organise, manage places. So that's been super insightful to have this conversation. Thanks for being part of the podcast, Shaun. It's really appreciated.
That's my pleasure.
So if you want to find out more about Shaun, you can read the description in the links below this particular episode. And if you want to reach out to Shaun and his team and Destination Core and the other brands that he mentioned, like the Jacob Elliott Group, feel free to do so. And I just wanted to take this time to thank you again. Been really interesting conversation. Hopefully it's prompted you some ideas when you've been listening to this particular episode. Have something, I can get on board with that, or I can use that as a focus within the place that I am a custodian of. And then feel free to reach out and connect with both of us if you wanted to follow up any of those pieces of conversation that we've been talking about today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now. I'm your host, John Doxey, and we've been thrilled to embark on this journey of exploration and learning with you. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where we will navigate through the captivating conversations and diverse perspectives in everything around people and places. So don't forget to like, share and subscribe to stay updated with all the latest content and join our growing community of listeners.